GMO. If those three little letters scare you, you're not alone. Our guest today has been on a mission for over 2 decades to uncover the health risks of genetically engineered foods. We'll discuss the real dangers of the next generation of GMOs, including gene editing and the potential release of genetically engineered microorganisms. This is the story of GMO 2.0 with Jeffrey Smith. Jeffrey, thank you so much for being on.
I am so happy to be here and to share this information with your audience, who I know is very sensitive not only to health issues, but also to whole environmental issues and where the planet is going.
Well, it's incredibly essential because we don't even know half the time what we're putting into our bodies and how that's really reacting within our bodies. And you've been doing this for a very long time. So before we get into the new stuff of the 2.0 type of things out there, could you just break down really quickly what you've learned over the last 2 decades just about GMO and this industry of modifying our foods and how it's impacting our health?
Let's do it from a shock and awe perspective.
Please.
Where let me just kind of shake the world of the listeners quickly in a very, very fast pace. We have a lot of evidence showing that GMOs and the Roundup herbicide that's sprayed on most of the GMOs and the Bt toxic toxin insecticide that's created by genetically engineered corn, for example, and in the South America, the soy, that these three things, the GMOs, the Roundup, and the Bt, are driving high levels of disease. In fact, we know that when people switch to organic food, which does not allow either the GMOs or the Roundup and the Bt toxic crops, that people get better from a large number of diseases. Now, if that's true, we should see a rise in those diseases in parallel with the increased use of GMOs. We should see a rise in the level of those diseases in livestock and pets. We should see animal feeding studies which indicate these diseases or their precursors are associated with forced feeding of GMOs and Roundup. And we should ideally see modes of action that it can explain how they create the diseases. Well, we have all of them. We have all of them. And so what I want to do very quickly, we're not going to spend an hour on the modes of action and all the animal feeding studies and whatnot. As I said, the shock and awe is the 50,000-foot view, and it's going to be the epidemiological studies. What diseases are going up in parallel with the increased use of GMOs and Roundup? That's correlation. It doesn't prove causation, but we have so much other evidence, including modes of action, clinical studies, animal feeding studies, that we're confident that there is a causal factor. So what I want to do is share the screen and glide through almost 40 slides very, very quickly to show which diseases that people have, including some of your audience, may be related to GMOs and Roundup. So we're looking now at inflammatory bowel disease. And you'll see this yellow line, which is the amount of glyphosate-based herbicides sprayed on corn and soy. Both corn and soy are genetically engineered not to die when sprayed with Roundup. The chief poison in Roundup is glyphosate. So this basically tracks the amount of extra glyphosate thrown into the human food supply through the genetically engineered soy and corn, and it's tracked to inflammatory bowel disease. And the R value, or the correlation, is 0.9378. A perfect correlation would be 1. Again, we can't say that one causes the other, but we have so much evidence that it does. This could be the extent to which it is influencing statistics in the United States in terms of disease. So I'm going to be flying through these particular charts, and some of them, like this, have glyphosate applied, like the last one, but it also has simply the percentage of genetically engineered soy and corn compared to the total soy and corn. So it compares two things. And in this one, a few of them have a trend. Prior to, say, in this case, 1993, where would the disease be going if no new factor came in? So this is deaths from obesity. So we just went from inflammatory bowel disease to death from obesity. I'm going to fly through these charts. You look at the images to see the slope. I'll read the title of the disease, and we'll get through 40 slides in less than 2 minutes. Here we go. Anxiety, diabetes, deaths from Alzheimer's, deaths from Parkinson's, deaths from hypertension, autism in 6-year-olds, insomnia, celiac disease, hospitalizations for acute kidney injury, death from kidney failure, kidney and pelvic cancer, liver cancer, liver and bile duct cancer, thyroid cancer, death from acute myeloid leukemia, breast cancer, deaths from intestinal infection, deaths from disorders of lipoprotein metabolism, peritonitis, hepatitis C, dementia, deaths from senile dementia, ADHD, schizophrenia, suicide by overdose, congenital birth defects, congenital heart defects, newborn metabolic disorders, newborn genitourinary disorders, skin disorders, newborns with lung conditions, newborns with eye disorders, immune-related newborn blood disorders, anemia, lymph disorders, and age-adjusted deaths due to stroke. This is the results of a survey of 3,256 people who reported getting better from 28 different conditions when they switched to non-GMO and largely organic diets. Many of them correspond with the charts you just saw. The most common result of improvement, according to this research, as well as informal audience surveys at 150 lectures, including medical conferences, shows digestive problems always number one. And fatigue and brain fog follow very closely.
And for everyone listening right now, everyone listening, let me just jump in, that these were all strikingly similar charts that sloped upwards on the trend. And we'll also be sharing this on a YouTube channel and other videos as well. But I mean, those charts are really all looking very, very similar across the board. And you're making the case now that glyphosate is a big part of this, correct?
Glyphosate and GMOs. You see,
GMOs.
If we want to try and find, for example, a connecting the dots strategy, we can look, for example, at cancer. Glyphosate was determined to be a Class 2A carcinogen by the World Health Organization. But we also know that when Roundup Ready corn was fed to rats over 2 years, and this corn was not sprayed with Roundup, they also had multiple massive tumors. And tumors showed up in a lot of animal feeding studies. So both GMOs alone and the Roundup alone and together. When we look at insomnia, for example, the sleep cycle is often governed by melatonin, which converts from serotonin, which is created from L-tryptophan, which is produced in the gut bacteria through a shikimate pathway, which is blocked by glyphosate. So if you have glyphosate on your food, which is not just the Roundup Ready, but glyphosate is also sprayed on grains and beans just before harvest to dry them down, then you may be blocking the production of L-tryptophan from your own gut bacteria, starving your body of serotonin, 90% of which is produced in the gut, and that may not be able to translate into melatonin, which might cause the insomnia. So those are examples. If the most powerful predictive causal study on glyphosate shows that it causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Well, you saw a bunch of things in the liver. We can see how glyphosate blocks detoxification through the liver and cellular detoxification, and we can predict what happens there. We can go through each one of those diseases and show the animal feeding studies, the clinical experience, the livestock and pets, both from owners of pets and livestock as well as veterinarians, to the modes of action. I did this for digestive disorders in the peer-reviewed study report with the survey results in the International Journal of Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine. I just focused on digestive disorders, and there was so much evidence explaining how GMOs, Bt toxin, and Roundup could drive those diseases. For example, Roundup causes leaky gut. It also can damage the gut bacteria because it's an antibiotic. It can suppress digestive enzymes. It can damage the walls of the intestines. Bt toxin can create holes inside the cells, another type of leaky gut. It also damages the walls of the intestines. The GMOs have been shown to create potentially precancerous cell growth in the digestive tract, larger intestinal organs, and other digestive problems like stomach lesions and all that. You put them all together, no wonder that digestive issues are the number one reported benefit from people who get off of GMOs and Roundup, and that no wonder that inflammatory bowel and irritable bowel are skyrocketing in those that are not. So we can pull it apart, and if this were a talk just on GMOs 1.0, we would end up with pretty powerful, convincing data. But I want to suggest, just to shortcut it, I did a film with Amy Hart called Secret Ingredients. We looked at 12 people, including families, that switched to organic, and autistic kids are no longer on the spectrum. Infertile couples have kids, people with allergies and brain fog and digestive disorders and all these things got better. And the doctors in the film say these are not one-offs. This is typical among my patients when they switch. In fact, when they cheat, their autoimmune disease symptoms come back, their joint pain comes back, and then they become absolutely dedicated. And then the scientists in the film explain why, and we have animations that show what happens in the body. Together, that is a very compelling case for eating organic, so much so that virtually everyone who watches it, who isn't already eating 100% organic, increases their commitment on the spot to organic. So it's also used by those people who are food fanatics and are trying to convince their friends to eat organic, and their friends now stay away whenever they talk about food. They roll their eyes and run. And I said, don't do it yourself. You're discredited because you're a friend. Let me do it. Show them the film Secret Ingredients at secretingredientsfilm.com and let that do the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah, so much of this really boils down to, of course, being selective in what you eat. I have this question for you because you are such a skilled and expert on the idea of GMO and glyphosate. Do you feel that gluten has really been kind of promoted as the cause when in fact it is the glyphosate that is the issue, or is it a little bit of both? Because gluten's been around for a while. This idea of celiac disease, is that a part of this issue here that we're seeing?
Well, in 2012, I think I was the first person to promote the idea that glyphosate and GMOs can create a greater susceptibility to gluten sensitivity. Mm-hmm. And I remember calling up gluten guru Tom O'Brien and said, I'm about to do a press conference with Mark Hyman, sponsored by Mary's Done Crackers in New York, called Beyond Gluten. And I think GMOs and Roundup are causing it. Here's my theory: the leaky gut, the activation of the immune system, the suppression of digestive enzymes, and the damage to the gut bacteria. He says, yeah, it all sets up the stage for gluten sensitivity. And so I did a paper on it, and some people like Stephanie Seneff from MIT and others were supportive of it and gave some information. And then Stephanie and Anthony Samsel published their own peer-reviewed article on the hand-in-glove celiac and gluten sensitivity that fits exactly with the modes of action of glyphosate. And we know that a significant percentage of people who switch to organic get better from the gluten sensitivity issues. I will show you, for example, on this chart we just looked at, gluten sensitivity is 42.2%. 42.2% of the people who responded to the survey of 3,256 people reported getting better in their sensitivity to gluten. Now, we have even more information now since we had 2012. I've done a number of webinars, one with John Gilday and Zach Bush and others, and Stephanie Seneff and whatnot. And there's now very specific ways in which glyphosate damages the gut bacteria or creates a zonulin enforced leaky gut. And for another way is that Roundup Ready soy, for example, has as much as 7 times the amount of trypsin inhibitor when it's cooked compared to non-GM soy. If you inhibit the trypsin, which is the protein digesting enzymes. If you block that, then it means you're leaving undigested proteins like gluten, gliadin, which means that it has more capacity to create gluten sensitivity and autoimmune disease, because these lumbering, large, undigested proteins go through the holes created by glyphosate or Bt toxin into the blood supply. Then the immune system sees them as invaders, takes a picture with their iPhone of the intruder, posts it on the internal Facebook, and says, anyone that looks like this, attack. But it's a blurred iPhone, and it looks like the thyroid, or it looks like the pancreas, and now the body's attacking itself because of old iPhones used by the immune system. But so basically, we have a situation where glyphosate and GMOs and Bt toxins set up the human condition for food sensitivities and autoimmune disease, which are all on the rise, including, as we say, gluten and milk and all these. And it's a perfect storm. We can see exactly why the digestion is not happening. The ability of the microvilli is disabled. The gaps occur inside and between cells if what we think is happening is true. The protective layer, the mucal layer of the gut is damaged because of the micro antibiotic effects of glyphosate. And you can see what happens with glyphosate. They took a human model of a digestive system, put in the fecal matter of a 3-year-old who had never had antibiotics, lived 100% on organic food, fed that organic food for 3 weeks, and then applied Roundup. And the changes that occurred in that gut, I went through it with one of the scientists, and we went through the 28 different conditions that people reported getting better from: digestion, fatigue, obesity, brain fog, anxiety, depression, food allergies and sensitivities, memory, joint pain, seasonal allergies, gluten sensitivity, insomnia, hormonal problems, musculoskeletal pain, autoimmune disease, etc. I haven't finished it, but there we go. We went through all 28 of those conditions, and I said, can what happened in the gut from Roundup explain the creation or exacerbation of any of these? And one at a time, every single one could be explained from just the gut bacteria. But from another perspective, virtually every single one could be explained by leaky gut, because there's a theory that leaky gut leads to all disease. By the same token, glyphosate damages the mitochondria, which can explain so many of those. And then the shikimate pathway, which can explain so many of those because of the neurotransmitters of dopamine and serotonin being starved in the body. And then there's the hormonal imbalance. And then there's the inability to absorb minerals, because the minerals are now bound and chelated by glyphosate, which can explain so many more. Or the interference of intercellular communication, which is called gap junctions, which is found to decline by 50%. Or the fact that there's no detoxification at the same level prior to glyphosate, because it blocks the detoxification of the P450 cytochrome pathway in the liver, plus the NRF2 cellular detox pathways. They're all reduced, which means it's the king of all the other toxins. All these other toxins that are in the body that are normally ushered out are now doing horrible work on the body because glyphosate keeps them there. So we can look at these modes of action through. We know more about glyphosate simply because there's more research on glyphosate than GMOs. But when we look on GMOs alone, it also reinforces and acts in many of the same ways.
Yeah, I remember reading Genetic Roulette and just seeing in all these ways the idea of glyphosate and GMOs really causing a vicious disease pattern where one thing leads to another, and you have this cascade of events. It's not just the microbiome, as you say, it's mitochondria, it's so many hormonal things, it's so many things that are impacting. And you saw that, I mean, that really startled me, that 82% of people with digestive disorders got better by just removing these things. And then fatigue, which everyone seems to be dealing with these days, was also number 2, 62% or say got better. Does that also mean that we, even if we think we're eating well, are eating poorly because GMOs are so abundant? Meaning that you have people that eat at Whole Foods that have a lot of these symptoms too, and try to eat somewhat organic, but they're eating somewhat processed things in boxes, let's say, things that are, they're still going to be ingesting GMO type foods and glyphosate. Correct? Is that
Yeah.
on the
So,
whole?
so first of all, Whole Foods is not necessarily a healthier choice.
Right.
Um, so let's just, if you go to their food bar, they do have organic salads,
Mhm.
but their cooked foods are not organic, and many have GMOs and Roundup. They sell corn that's genetically engineered corn that may be sprayed with Roundup and produces Bt toxin. And Bt corn has been shown to have an activation of an allergen called gamazine that no one knows about. And the Roundup Ready corn has higher levels of putrescine and cadaverine, responsible for the foul odor of rotting dead bodies and also linked to allergies and cancer. There's a lot of things wrong with GMOs and Roundup, and Whole Foods does not deal with those. So let's just get that clear.
Okay.
Now, if you want to avoid GMOs and Roundup, the easiest way is to buy organic. And if you switch to organic, take notes, create a spreadsheet, and every column is a different day. The first column is all of your symptoms. And then the next column on that day is 1 to 10, 1 to 10. Insomnia, mood, add a mood in there, add energy level in there. And at the top of that column, the percentage of organic that day. If you're tracking, if there's gluten reactions, put that in there too. Watch what happens over 2 or 3 weeks. Because when you look at these evidence, you may have horrible skin conditions and you may see skin conditions and eczema improving on the chart. So you may be focusing on that, and that may or may not go away because you don't know if GMOs or Roundup are the cause. But you may forget entirely to look at brain fog or energy level or mood or joint pain or stiffness in the morning. So put it all in there and see. And then if you cheat, fine, you cheat. You're going away for a holiday and you can't get any organic food. You're going to Asia where you don't even know how to ask for what they have. And then you look and what difference it is. Now, some people, when they go to Europe, they can eat things they can't eat in the United States because the food supply is different. Fine, note that as well. Here's a way where you can take back your own authority. Now, if you can't eat organic, at least avoid GMOs, and you can go to responsibletechnology.org for a list of both the GMO crops. There's about a dozen, and also the hidden ingredients. There's a lot of them because soy and corn derivatives are practically everywhere in processed foods. But also you want to avoid the foods that have high levels of glyphosate if they're not organic. And we also have a database. Everyone that tests for glyphosate, we take all that, put it on our site so you can look. Oats have huge levels. Wheat has high levels. Lentils, mung beans, chickpeas. Don't eat hummus unless it's organic. Non-GMO is not going to help because chickpeas are not GMOs. They're going to be non-GMO every time, but they're sprayed with Roundup just before harvest, and they practically float in the stuff. So you don't want to feed your kids oat cereals unless they're organic. So this is the way to navigate. At least be non-GMO and avoid the Roundup if you can't eat organic, and note what happens in your body. So I've presented at a couple of dozen medical conferences and convinced tens of thousands of doctors to prescribe non-GMO organic diets, and they're amazed. One said, I've got 5,000 patients. They all get better. One said, I have 9,000 patients. They're all on an organic diet, and you can see it. I talked to one person. He said, I've been prescribing organic diets for my whole life, and I have about 50,000 patients, and you could see they are different than the general population. So don't take their word for it. Try it. It's worth it, and try it soon. So it's not like in a year, like, I tried it, and it turns out all these things changed. I should have done it a year ago. One of the things, Casper, that I find for people who actually make a change is that they make a change immediately after the information. Whether it's a commitment, whether it's, some people will clear out stuff from their cabinet. Some people will do it by attrition because they can't afford to throw things out, but they'll make a decision immediately after hearing this information, and they won't put it off because the inspiration will go down and down and down, and it'll become like vague rumor of, there was a time that I should have done that. And then they're off to something else.
Yeah, you need that inspired action. And I do believe in constantly tracking how you feel. I think, we used to be very intuitive back in the day, and now we have so much information and cell phones and everything else that we kind of lose touch with even how we feel on a daily basis. And we normalize fatigue, digestive issues, these other things that, decades ago weren't normalized at all. So it's really sad. And this is all just attributed to GMO 1.0.
Yes.
Now there's something of a 2.0.
And let's get into the heavy stuff.
Let's go into that, because you've been preaching about this and awareness of the dangers of GMO 2.0. So tell us, what's the difference between a 1.0 and a 2.0 GMO, and why should we be scared?
Well, and there's, just as there's a way out of GMO 1.0 by eating better and then convincing many people, so we have a critical number, which creates a tipping point of consumer rejection, which is actually underway. Now we have GMO 2.0, which are new techniques which have the ability to create GMOs very, very quickly, very easily, very inexpensively, and some with more power. So there's gene drives where you can create a genetically engineered organism and all of its offspring get the traits instead of just half from the mother and half from the father. There's sprays that can, with RNA in them, that can kill insects and possibly get absorbed into our system and reprogram our DNA. There's insects that are being developed, not yet created, with genetically engineered viruses where they can do genetic engineering in the field. There's all sorts of genetically engineered environments that they're envisioning, not just GMOs, but let's change the microbiome in the soil. Let's change the insects. Let's spray with RNAi and create GMOs. The most significant change right now comes from gene editing like CRISPR. Mm-hmm. Now, those are ways to create GMOs that are cheaper. And the way that they do it in the past was they would shoot a gene gun of millions of particles coded by genes, hoping that some of them make it into the DNA of some of the cells, or smuggle in genes in bacteria, but you don't know where in the genome it ends up. Here, like with CRISPR, you have a scissors and you have a guide. Okay, cut here, it cuts. Cut here, it cuts. Now, the biotech industry has been pretending, just as it did with GMO 1.0, that it's precise, safe, and natural. But they've convinced governments that it's precise, safe, and natural. So governments like the United States, Canada, the UK, India, Australia, Japan, Argentina, Brazil, have believed them and deregulated gene editing plants, animals, and or microbes, especially if there's no foreign DNA put in. But the technique is far from being ready for prime time. The journal Nature describes the outcome of 3 CRISPR experiments on human embryos as chromosomal mayhem. What happens is it can cut all over the place, not just in the place you want. When it reconnects, it can cause deletions, additions, actually chromothripsis, which is the shattering of the chromosome and the reorganization. It can pull DNA from other sources that happen to be in the petri dish or used in bacteria as a process of genetic engineering. It can, and we have a little 6-minute animated film called 7 Reasons Why Gene Editing is Dangerous and Unpredictable at responsibletechnology.org. That is a really important 6 minutes because it shows the elected officials and regulatory agencies that they've been lied to. And it names 7 reasons, so it becomes a challenge. Show us, biotech handlers, that you've not been lying to us about these 7, and they can't. They don't have science on their side. But they do have recruited ministers and ministries and secretaries of whatever claiming that, oh no, it's safe and easy. So you can gene edit a food in the United States and put it on the market without telling anyone in the government. And if you send a note to the USDA, they'll say, oh yeah, it doesn't fall into our criteria if it doesn't have an inserted gene from a known pathogen. So go ahead, put it on the market. And Conscious Foods, which is a terrible name, but they're gene editing salad fixings and putting it on the market unlabeled because they're doing it through restaurants and caterers. So you may be eating GMO stuff that no one is able to identify. Now, in the short term, these stealth GMOs which could create new allergens or toxins, could flood our food supply and cause disease. That is a catastrophe, but it's the least of the worries. On a bigger scale, there's a gene rush because it's so easy and cheap to use CRISPR. You can buy a lab for less than $2,000. All these people want to use gene editing to solve a problem or make a fortune, and sometimes both. And they're targeting insects and trees and grass and birds and pets and livestock and all sorts of types of food in hopes that their patented gene-edited GMO could solve a problem and make them rich. Now, when you release them into the environment, they can't be recalled. They self-propagate. The most common result of genetic engineering is surprise side effects. So now you have an unregulated, easily accessed technology that is prone to side effects, that is permanent in the environment, and that is the recipe for disaster, where we will incrementally and then wholesale replace nature in as little as one generation. So future generations will not inherit the products of billions of years of evolution, but a mix of natural and man-made prone to side effects that you can't even tell. So this replacement of nature is the fulfillment, I know, of an indigenous prophecy made by one wise man who told a friend of mine in the early 90s, we have the capacity around this time to end biological evolution as we know it, unless we do something to stop it. I heard those words and go, that's the best definition of what's happening I've ever heard. I think he was talking to us.
Yeah.
So that's a bigger piece where we have come to the inevitable time in human civilization when we can redirect the streams of evolution for all time, on purpose or by accident. So now is the time to make important decisions about protecting all living beings and all future generations, rather than haphazardly being the bane of existence for future generations, dealing with the folly of our lack of ability to step up and own the fact that this technology is so powerful and long-lasting. What we've done at the Institute for Responsible Technology, we're joining the global campaign to try and get the regulators to re-regulate, or to, in the EU, to stop the deregulation. But we're focused on the most dangerous GMOs. The most dangerous are the microbes. Mm-hmm. Now, we know from COVID, whether it was genetically engineered in a lab or not, it could have been. And there's an example of a GMO potential to take out millions of people, far more than this pandemic, because there are far greater potential pathogens that could be enhanced through genetic engineering. But infectious disease is one small sliver of what a genetically engineered microbiome could do. So all those who are trying to stop the gain-of-function research on potentially pandemic pathogens, good on you, but not enough. You're missing biology. You're forgetting something. Over 50,000 studies in the last 5 or 6 years have shown that the human microbiome is fundamental to human health. We outsource about up to 90% of our metabolic and chemical functions on a daily basis to microbes. Things we can't do on our own. We co-evolved with the microbiome. And so, okay, you do this better, you handle that, we'll handle this. And a huge amount is outsourced. In fact, we can get away with a measly 23,000 genes, less than earthworms, because we use the 3.5 million genes of the microbes living inside us. And they do things that we couldn't even design with all of the best scientists, let alone with our bodies. Now, it's so important that the human microbiome is designed and healthy from the start, because the entire health of the person's life can be dictated by the population and diversity of the microbiome in the first few months. So milk digesting microbes enter the birth canal in the second trimester. The baby is born and inoculated. The milk, the first organisms that come from the breast, clear out the oxygen from the digestive system. So it's an anaerobic, non-oxygenated area for the best microbes like bifidobacteria. Then 27% of the microbes in the body of the infant come from the milk, 10% from the skin on the nipple. And If the baby is feverish or has a problem, their salivary microbes communicate back through the breast, changes the milk supply, and changes the health of the body. And a large portion of the milk is undigestible by the infant, not designed for the infant, it's designed for the microbes. Why? This incredible system is designed because microbial integrity is so important. Now, what's interesting is this. Microbes not only travel and mutate like we know from the pandemic, but they swap genes with other microbes. That's why they're so intelligent. They swarm their genes so that they can better support ecosystems and organisms like humans and be supported by. So you release a genetically engineered microbe, and let's say it travels around the planet, which it can. It mutates, which it can. But the altered gene that you created and released in soil now ends up in the gut of an infant on the other side of the planet. And it's not even the microbe that you created. It's something else. It's been changed. So you have a nitrogen-fixing microbe like they're having 3 million corn acres right now that's genetically engineered. What happens if you have nitrogen-fixing gut bacteria? We don't know. Similarly, it'll end up in other ecosystems, doing things that were never intended or anticipated. And again, the most common result of genetic engineering is surprise side effects. But with microbes, even if it happens to be precise and with no side effects and no mistakes, you're changing the microbial nature of organisms that are fundamental to human health and turn out to be fundamental to our planet. Algae creates most of the Earth's oxygen. Fungal networks shuttle nutrients between trees. Soil microbes not only create healthy crops, but sequester carbon. All of this is in danger if we put out genetically engineered microbes. There's an example of one that was created in the early 90s. Well-meaning scientists, let's solve many problems at once by genetically engineering a bacterium that survives in the root area of every plant on Earth. This is from a film I created called Don't Let the Gene Out of the Bottle. 16 minutes, watch it at responsibletechnology.org. They took Klebsiella planticola bacteria and turned it into a still to create alcohol. You can feed it plant matter and it turns it into alcohol. So they said, great, let's feed it all the crop residues that are normally burnt, put it in a tank, put the bacteria in, create alcohol for the tractor of the farmers. They can sell it as fuel, they can drink it, and they can take the nutrient-rich sludge at the bottom and spread it on the field as fertilizer. Well, you'll see in the film that there was a graduate student that happened to be doing research on this genetically engineered microbe that had already passed all of the EPA-required studies and was about to be released into the environment, and discovered that the nutrient-rich sludge, if it had been spread on the fields, could have theoretically rendered those fields sterile, because it could have turned all of the plants into alcohol, starting with the roots. And we also know from whistleblowers talked about in the film that a secret EPA study found that genetically engineered microbes go around the Earth. You can find them everywhere. So I asked Dr. Elaine Ingham, who's now like the queen of soil biology. At the time, she happened to be the advisor for this graduate student wanting to get his PhD. I said, what would have happened if they released it? Worst case scenario? She said, an end of terrestrial plant life on the planet. That's a cataclysm. But that cataclysm, Casper, is a microbe doing what it does. It's designed to do, genetically engineered wise, but in more ecosystems than planned. That doesn't even consider the mutation or what's called horizontal gene transfer, where that alcohol-producing gene now ends up in guts, making us drunk, in oceans, doing whatever it could do there. It doesn't take into account what could really go wrong, and already it could produce a cataclysm. There's another microbe in the film that can potentially change weather patterns. So here we are now with a knowledge of, oh my God, let's not let any microbes out. And now I'm going to give you the bad news.
Hit us.
All right. There's 3 million acres right now with genetically engineered microbes on it from one company. Another one can have up to 40 million acres. Those are 2 companies we know about. But there's 8 that have been registered with the EPA, but they don't have to tell you anything, what the microbe is, if it's been used, etc. But there is a huge number of companies entering the biological space for agriculture. Most of the biologicals are natural and non-GMO, but all the major GMO companies are now buying up these biological companies. And you can only patent a GMO biological, so we can assume that they're going to do that. And Bayer has a joint venture with Ginkgo Bioworks where they can genetically engineer thousands of microbes at the same time. So they're flooding it, and like in 1 acre of corn, you can have 5 trillion microbes, and the total number of genetically engineered corn in the world is less than 3 trillion plants. So the number of organisms is astounding. Now that's a monoculture of the same microbe that can change. Then you have synthetic biology plants that genetically engineer algae, bacteria, and fungus to yeast to create proteins. So they'll create CBDs, they'll create opiates, they'll create enzymes for industry, and they release the final product. But they may have leaky factories, and that may also flood the biosphere with very specialized genetically engineered microbes designed to produce things like medicines. It could be very dangerous. Also, some of the supplements that are created have naked DNA from the fermentation vats, and if that happens to be the gene that produced that particular supplement and we eat it, it could be picked up theoretically by our gut bacteria, and we may be creating the medicines or supplements inside us. And there's even companies designing genetically engineered probiotics for us to eat, as well as medicinal probiotics for specific disease that if you poop out now becomes an environmental release and can change the nature of our gut bacteria. The greatest diversity of genetically engineered microbes is in academia. There's tens of thousands of genetically engineered microbes that are the subject of studies each year. But even that is not as big as simple student experiments. CRISPR is being used in high schools more and more. And what they genetically engineer are microbes, not broccoli. So you have all of these high school students, and certainly all the biology students in college, who create every semester, sometimes, okay, take this microbe with this change, fine. But okay, try something on your own. Go grab a microbe from a stream, from your body, from the soil. And let's pick a CRISPR target sequence. One site has 120,000 to choose from. If that's not good enough, design your own. So now you have tens of thousands of microbes, over 100,000 CRISPR targets. Create a new organism that's never before existed, but don't lick your hands, wash your hands, don't let any wind come. They're going to be released all over the place. Millions of them just from students if we don't stop it. And what does the United States Environmental Protection Agency in charge of GMO microbes say? Nothing. There's no research. There's no safety assessments. There's no oversight. So we are flooding the microbiome with trillions and trillions of microbes for agriculture, accidental release for things that could have very serious production methods, and this genetic roulette of students producing massive amounts that can millions will come into the microbiome or into the biosphere every year. A lot will die, but some might be the ones that cause disease or collapse ecosystems. So what we're doing at the Institute for Responsible Technology, responsibletechnology.org, is creating a new movement to create the regulations, national laws, and international treaties to protect the microbiome. Full stop. No release of genetically engineered microbes. There's 1 trillion varieties estimated. We only have identified less than 1%. We're in awe of the majesty and intelligence, and at the same time, we're starting to destroy its function with blinders on. This is unacceptable. This is not what this generation should be doing to nature or humanity. This is an urgent priority. So I invite everyone to go to responsibletechnology.org, sign up for our regular newsletters and action steps, make a donation, ideally a monthly donation. We also have a program for self-care advocates and healthcare practitioners. We've curated information from our 20 years to make it easier for you to sort through not only information on GMO 2.0, but everything we discussed on GMO 1.0 as our way of giving back to those that support our work now, which is critical and crucial. And all life on Earth and all future generations are looking to see, ultimately, what we do with this now that we have the capacity to accidentally or purposely end biological evolution as we know it.
You know, it's astonishing this isn't talked about more. You know, we talk about climate change, we talk about all these things that are very important topics, but you never hear about this. And this sounds like something out of a Black Mirror episode of some sorts. But I mean, it's even worse. This is cataclysmic. This is the end of, you know, all that we know terrestrially. And so what do you think it is that's holding people back from having this discussion more? Is it purely money? Is it purely the fact that we can't see past things that aren't visually right in front of us sometimes, or, you know, don't have that much of I would say maybe sexy marketing appeal to it? What is it that, because I can even understand some of the regulators not getting behind this, because, you know, regulators are all slow to do things. Lobbyists are very good at their job. But this sounds, you know, beyond something that's a little bit problematic. This is a very big issue.
It's a good question as to why it's not being talked about. There's an interesting, deafening silence in media about risks of GMOs. Mm-hmm. Same in academia, same in the government, same among farmers. Those are the four groups that have been targeted by the biotech industry for a massive disinformation and infiltration campaign, which I've tracked as I visited 45 countries on this topic over 27 years. And we understand how they have manipulated media, sometimes in a very aggressive manner, how they've manipulated academia. If someone dares to write an article or a research study showing that there's problems with GMOs around it, they can get attacked. They can lose their job, lose their funding, lose their status. I've interviewed many of these people who weren't expecting to be, quote, whistleblowers. They were just doing their job. But when they reported their findings, they were fired or they were censored. So there's a full court press on disinformation, cover up. There's also a full court hype on CRISPR. CRISPR may, in fact, heal defects in human genomes. I'm not against that when it's not inheritable, when it's one person making a choice. Some people have had gene therapy and died, but that was their choice because their thing they were trying to heal was also life-threatening. But there is no general discussion about the risks. And part of the lack of discussion about the side effects of CRISPR is in how it is done. If you're doing CRISPR and you're doing a new thing, you look at a computer program and say, okay, it is likely to also cut here, here, and here. And according to the computer, those aren't important parts of the genome. So we can get away with it. And when they do their tests, if they do any tests to see if their cut and restructuring, reattachment was according to what they want, it's usually with inexpensive methods that will miss massive side effects. The few research studies that are published that do long-form reads and other ways of checking the genome, they always say, we're surprised to find out that these really long sections of DNA were gone or duplicated or reversed or scrambled. And most people don't know that because that's not how it's practiced. And the biotech industry has this cheerleading echo chamber of disinformation about that is aimed at regulators and governments and the media to all say, we want a free hand at doing what we're doing. Now, that's one thing. But the good news is it's very easy to explain the dangers of genetically engineering microbes, especially in a post-pandemic world. Yeah. It's very easy. I think I can do it in 3 minutes and give the aha OMG moment. Like, you mean there's millions of unregulated genetically engineered microbes being released by high school students and home hobbyists every year or will be soon, and they can overrun and change my microbiome, my child's microbiome, the soil microbiome, the ocean's microbiome. What are we going to do about it? That's pretty quick. The other thing is, fortunately, Casper, there are movements and campaigns and organizations whose success depends on a healthy microbiome. That is human health. All the functional medicine, integrated medicine, the people you talk to, they all know about the microbiome. So we have a program. They're going to be our first supporters. We're asking healthcare practitioners to join us, become regularly annual donors, and receive all sorts of information for themselves and their patients as an excuse to protect the microbiome. But there's also regenerative agriculture. The soil does the heavy lifting in healthy regenerative agriculture. They need that to be functioning properly. Climate change needs carbon drawdown to be successful, and that happens primarily with microbes. They need to do it with healthy microbes and not to damage that. Oceans and just terrestrial environmentalism requires healthy microbiomes. Rainforests, great, let's protect the rainforests. But it's not everything you see, it's what you don't see. A microbe released in New Jersey could take down the rainforest in the Amazon, and we're not seeing it, and we don't want to wait till we see it in order to do something about it. So what we need to do as an institute is find the leaders of all of these different movements, as well as the spiritual groups that believe GMO means God move over and has no place in human health or the environment. And we need to share what we now know from a scientific standpoint, from a logical standpoint, from a risk perspective, and then help them craft that message to that movement. So we become a movement of movements. We really don't have a lot of time in this. I helped build a movement over 27 years for food. We don't have that time to stop GMO 2.0's, unregulated release of microbes all over. So a movement of movements, and because it's so easy to explain, and if you go to responsibletechnology.org and you look at the 16-minute film, Don't Let the Gene Out of the Bottle, it's like an alarm call that you can't not see. And the 7 reasons why gene editing is dangerous and unpredictable, you now see what happens in the genome, and you can't accept the lies of the biotech industry. So we can influence popular culture with powerful messaging and visuals and stories and peer-reviewed articles and all of that, and documentaries and docuseries and all that. So we have a big plan to influence coalition building, popular culture, all aimed at this fire hose at regulations and treaties, and doing it quickly as possible. So it turns out influencing human behavior in terms of consumer choice for 25 years was cheap by comparison. We got away with fumes as budgets, and we're able to, hire people for next to nothing and get away with it. Now, when we're trying to create national laws and international treaties all over the planet, because it doesn't help if we got the U.S. locked down. Not good enough here. We need a lot of money. We need big funders to come in, but we also need the everyday person to say, okay, I can get by with this amount per month taken out of and every time I see my credit card statement, I'll say, good, I'm helping to protect the little guys, the microbes, and all things that they support.
And your own health. And
Yes.
your longevity and your kids'
Yes.
longevity and the Earth's longevity. I've always made this case. You want to be an eco. Yeah, there's that too. You want to be an eco warrior. Start with yourself. A healthy person is basically a healthy microbe on Earth. And the Earth has thousands of millions of trillions of microbes, just like we do. It's just on different levels, macro micros, right? So you want to start with yourself, and then that results in a healthier Earth as more and more people do that as well. So this is really, really essential stuff. Now, you're talking about this type of, doomsday event in a sense of where we are. If we don't do anything, what does that timeline look like? How many years do you give before we hit this kind of tipping point precipice where we can't go back?
No one has asked me that question. And I don't really focus on that as an answer. I don't really, when I started working on GMOs, no one knew what a GMO was. It was 1996. I didn't know what a GMO was, and they were about to plant a bunch of them where I was living in Iowa. And a lot of the environmental organizations had given up. Greenpeace was saying, that's genes out of the bottle. And I was looking at the strategy, saying, there's no NGO on earth that I can tell that's focused on the health dangers and translating the science into English and debunking the false science of the biotech industries like Monsanto, which is pretty easy to do, in order to drive consumer choice, which is the top of the food chain, which will then influence how many GMOs introduced, how many are planted, et cetera, et cetera. So I could not convince any NGO to focus on the health dangers. So I wrote a book, Seeds of Deception, focus on the health dangers. And then all of a sudden I was invited by all the different NGOs around the world to speak. And I guessed right in terms of an angle that had traction, that made a difference, that stopped the plans for Monsanto, which was explicit to genetically engineer 100% of all commercial seeds in the world and patent them. So we ended up with about 12 GMO food crops and a tipping point numbers. So when I see this problem with GMO 2.0, I'm looking for solutions. And the solution is so obvious. We have evidence that the dangers are real, but it's so easy to convey that. And we have the scientific argument where we will never lose a debate on this. It was interesting. I was talking to a microbiologist. A friend of mine was helping me try and find some scientists because we need to work with scientists, and I always have for the food side, and it's a little harder for the specialties for microbiologists. So he said, I was talking to a microbiologist, and he's prominent and works at a big, named place. And he said he wasn't worried about GMO microbes. He was more worried about plants and animals. He said the replication process is going to just weed out any GM problem because they won't survive. I said, get me his number. So I talked to him for about an hour. And during the conversation, he started off not worried. And by the end of the conversation, he said, you're absolutely right. We should not release any genetically engineered microbes. He said the ones that are being released in the field, they're designed to survive. And that completely nullified his concern, his lack of concern about lack of survival. And then I talked to him about the simple numbers being produced by high school students and that some of them might survive. And then we talked about some other things. And he was totally on board in an hour. Now, he's a microbiologist. I asked a microbiologist who works with us regularly, I said, ask 5 of your friends what they think of genetically engineered microbes and the potential risk. He called them up or emailed them, and they all said the same thing. I hadn't really thought about it. But in an hour, a microbiologist who'd spent decades working with microbes now realizes, OMG, this is a powder keg. Some of the microbiologists that we reached out to said, this is biological dynamite, unquote. So we have the science on our side. We just don't have scientists on our side yet because they haven't thought about it. So we have a job to do. One of the targets we need are scientists, particularly experts. And we need to give them a voice so they're not scared to be defunded and deplatformed by the biotech industry. And I think right now, the investment in the microbes as a genetic engineered industry is a lot less than the plants and animals. We have to uproot millions of acres. We have a window now, which won't be there in 5 or 10 years after all of these biological companies start pumping out GMOs. And then they get to say to the regulators, well, if you make a change, it'll be horrible for the economy, which stops regulators in their tracks.
Yeah. Money
and they'll
talks.
have to wait. They'll have to wait until a catastrophe. See, that's the other option. We can just, build up a thing, not have enough power, a catastrophe happens, and then we say, I told you so. But who wants to do that?
No one wants to do that. It
Right.
impacts everyone in a horrible way. You gave some actionable pieces. Of course, go to Institute for Responsible Technology, IRT, fund that. What can people do in their everyday actions to gain some control back? Of course, we have choices. We are kind of being fed a lot of different information that leads to certain choices by these mass conglomerates, these powerful companies behind everything. But don't we have the choices then to say enough is enough? We won't support them.
Yes. It's more that for GMO 1.0, where our choices in the supermarket are super important
Yeah.
for our own health and for food. Our choices are harder when they're genetically engineering insects, mosquitoes, but
How do you
still
feel
important.
about that? The mosquito thing going on right now with Bill Gates and
I can
Texas
talk
and
about that in
Florida.
just a second, but
Yeah.
let me
Yeah.
respond to
Please.
this very important question about empowering individuals.
Absolutely.
So do sign up for our newsletter, because sometimes we have sign on to this letter to Secretary Vilsack, sign on to this petition, contact, in a click and send revolutionary style, send out this thing to your members, your elected officials, share this document with your journalists. So there's things people can do. There's also receiving our information and sharing it on social media. Because again, I don't think consciousness is linear and local and isolated. I think human beings through history have had leaps, that there's changes that happen, and that I think it happens often like a physical system where the number of aligned iron filings can create a magnet. All of a sudden, a phase transition, the number of pacemaker cells in a heart can all of a sudden get the entire system to function that way. I think that we need a critical mass of thinking. And we're running through critical mass shifts quicker than ever before with the social media information. And there's changes, not always in a good direction, but often. And I think that participating as a point of dissemination of this is way more important than people realize, because they're aligning those iron filings, creating a thing where everyone goes, well, it's obvious. We're not at the point where it's obvious, but that'll happen. Where everyone goes, oh, it's obvious we need to protect the microbiome. But right now it's like, nothing's happening. No one's home. So there's that. Then there's individual choice to go above and beyond the click and send revolutionary, above and beyond signing their name. And that is those that are writers, those that are speakers, those that are practitioners in some format, those that have relationships with funders or with people who have tremendous influence. So when people say, what can I do? As they have for 27 years, I say, it depends. What do you do? What do you love to do? Who do you know? And figure out how you want to make a contribution. And don't feel guilty if you can't devote your 100% of your time like I do. That's not your job. But there may be a portfolio of actions that you're using to help the world. Include this in it. And watch the films and read the information so that you're part of that consciousness now aligning and accommodating for this inevitable time in human history where we can end biological evolution as we know it or protect nature. Now, what happens also is, because this is a threat like no other, where a single accident in a high school class can devastate the population, it means we have more power to destroy nature and ourselves than ever before. We have a greater responsibility than ever before, individually. Now, what does that mean? It means that the relationship between us and the microbiome must change. We must be the safeguard, the sentry, the guardian at the gates, not the barbarians at the gates, the guardians at the gates to protect the integrity of nature, not just the microbiome, but gene pool in general. So when that's the case, if we can use this opportunity, this unprecedented risk in terms of the technology, to change our relationship with nature to become the protectors, that affects way more than genetic engineering. Now we have a new mindset. Oh yeah, these are our oceans. This is our atmosphere. This is our rainforest. but it's starting on the level of genetic integrity where the ripple effect is so easy. I mean, invasive species are one thing. 24 rabbits were introduced in 1859 to Australia. By the 1920s, there was over 10 billion because rabbits multiply like rabbits and there were natural predators. Everyone gets that. But what about not just an invasive species? What if you replace everything in an ecosystem with something new, genetically engineered? Oh, good. This company's giving us this. This academic is giving us this. And now you have all invasive species that you cannot even identify that travel around the world. So it'll become obvious. It'll become the duh moment. Everyone will get it. But it requires the clarity of a certain number of individuals for that consciousness to go, oh yeah, that's a problem. And putting it out there on social media, including it in conversations. So that's my answer to that question. I have forgotten the second question.
Oh, now we were going into a subset of that question was the mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah.
The engineered mosquitoes in Florida now and in Texas, and you saw cases of malaria pop up afterwards, but they're supposed to be doing this and that. Is that just a small kind of, a foresight into what we may see more and more if we continue down this road, as far as we have no clue what's going to happen as we release these things into the environment?
A company called Oxitec genetically engineered mosquitoes so that the population of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, which carry Zika, dengue fever, and chikungunya diseases, would be reduced. And they got it released in Panama, in Brazil, in the Cayman Islands, and one other place. I think escaping me now. And they were trying to get it released in Florida. And so I was testifying at the Florida Mosquito Control Board in Key West, and their scientist was testifying in favor of it. And I was talking to this scientist, Derek Nemo, and I said, Derek, when you release these mosquitoes, you're changing the gene pool of mosquitoes, of the planet. He goes, oh, no. They're designed to die off. They'll only exist if we're releasing them. They won't survive. Now, they had said that there's a 0% chance that they'd live. It turns out there's a 3% natural chance, but in the presence of tetracycline, which is found in a lot of things, including cat food, it was an 18% survival rate. They said, oh, there's no females that bite being released, but millions of them were being released. So they were lying. But he was saying, I'm absolutely confident we're not going to affect the gene pool. Well, 3 years after they released millions or billions in Brazil, they found in 60% of their samples genomes that had never existed on Earth before. They were a combination of the two types of mosquito genes from Oxitec's version and the natural ones. And they didn't know whether these were more likely to carry disease or harder to eradicate. No one had done any studies on it. No one had seen it before. So Derek Nemo was wrong. So then I said to him, Derek, have you looked at the saliva of your mosquitoes? Because you're releasing a lot of females because they get through your filtering process. So people are getting bitten and the saliva goes through the blood. Have you tested the saliva? He goes, well, we're just now seeing if the gene product from the gene that we're inserting is expressed in the saliva. So I'm thinking, a little late, my friend. You've already released millions in 4 countries. And I said to him, Derek, when you genetically engineer something, you can create massive collateral damage, changing the expressions of other genes accidentally. There's a human cell that they put in a gene carefully, and up to 5% of the expressing genes change their levels of expression. Some switched on for the first time, some shut down, then he changed their levels. So you might have allergens or toxins or carcinogens that you're not even aware of. Shouldn't you be testing the full saliva and not just for one protein? I'll never forget his response. He said, good idea. So,
oh boy,
they did get approval to release it. They had a newer version, which has its own problems. They claim it solved the problems before, but they were lying again and it didn't. And they did release it. But then it was interesting that they didn't actually accomplish what they were looking for. They rolled it out in the Caymans in a test, and we paid for Freedom of Information Act reports, and it showed that it was a failure. Now, before they released the fact that it was a failure, they were ready to roll it out nationwide, the entire Cayman Islands. And when it was released that it was a failure, they quietly left and fired all the people that they had hired locally. It was a failure everywhere. It never reduced the amount of disease. In fact, they wanted to release it in 12 counties in California to reduce the incidence of local propagated diseases in these categories. There wasn't a single disease for the last 10 years in that category that started in California. The few that happened came from other states. There was no need for it. California said no, but Texas apparently didn't, and Florida is like gung-ho. So it wasn't the malarious mosquitoes that Bill Gates is looking for now. He's looking for using gene drives that will kill off the mosquitoes through population, as they have progeny. But gene drives are very controversial because it completely can eradicate an entire species. And when you get rid of the Aedes aegypti, more aggressive tiger mosquitoes might come in and fill the niche. And they also carry these things. Also, what about the birds or the insects that eat the insects? We don't know that. Also, genetic engineering is a leaky technology. You have a killer gene in one insect. What if it transfers through horizontal gene transfer to something that eats it or something that's next to it or whatever? Now you may be killing off random insects or other types of animals or plants or whatever. No. So it's a very powerful technology made available because of gene editing. And it puts genetic engineering technology into the organism so their offspring has a GMO that creates GMOs that transfers things between chromosomes, and it passes along the genetic engineering machinery in a way that may be forever unrecallable and out of control.
Yeah.
So I'm not in favor of that as a solution to a problem which is very often created by industrial agriculture and inappropriate ecological actions.
In the same line of questioning, this is a question I posed to Max Goldberg from Organic Insider, who is a colleague of ours and a friend and connected us. But appeal, the organic coding that is not going on.
People ask me about that.
Yeah.
A friend asked me yesterday, and I talked to Max about it. He goes, when it came out, I was like, we don't really know. It's not genetically engineered, so it's not my area. So I can easily, this is one of the good things about having a specialty. People ask me about all sorts of things. I say, good question, no idea. I only want to speak on the things that I have invested so much time into that I am absolutely sure what I'm talking about. Or if I make a mistake, I can understand it and I can amend it. And I have occasionally through the years, but I double check and triple check. Typically, if I'm writing something, I'll interview one or more scientists and then show them what I've written so that it's accurate. So it's the advantage of not being a scientist. I get to play dumb and they get to then see it, and it works.
No, I appreciate that. Max gave a similar answer. It's just we don't know. We don't know what 99% of it is. It's not listed. It doesn't have to be. So the transparency of it is just not there. That's the biggest concern at this moment. And I believe that that's the concern across the board. There isn't much transparency in what's going on. We're playing God with nature, which is never a good sign. I mean, we have millions of years of evolution that's done a wonderful job. It's slowly getting to where we are right now. And now we're trying to kind of unwind or change that in a very drastic period of time. You like to say think huge because thinking big is so last century. So if you were to bestow upon the audience here, how can we think huge moving into the future and be positive and not say this is, the end of it? What would be your advice there to think huge?
One of the barriers to thinking huge is the tendency to give away power. We naturally give away power to parents. The educational system in the United States was created to model the Prussian system to create good soldiers. It also creates good factory workers. But it gives away power to schools, to institutions. We give away power to media. We give away power sometimes to social media or the internet in general, and we can give away power to elected officials to doctors. There's a interesting problem with the GMOs regulation around the world that follows the same train of thought. I've talked to a regulator in a country. He says, we don't even have to review GMOs. Your FDA, which is the strongest regulator in the world, they've approved it. And I said, so you don't do any research, as long as the FDA approves it, you accept it. He said, that's right, giving away power. And then I explained the FDA has no required safety studies for GMOs, in spite of the fact that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists working at the FDA in the early 90s was that GMOs were different and dangerous and could lead to toxins, allergens, and new diseases. The person in charge of policy, Michael Taylor, was Monsanto's former attorney, later Monsanto's vice president, and said, no testing necessary, no labeling necessary. You can put a GMO on the market without even telling the FDA. And there's a voluntary consultation process. It's a meaningless exercise at the end of which you get a letter saying you're in charge of making the decision whether it's safe or not. And if you look at Monsanto, they don't do the research. I talked to a former Monsanto scientist. He said, we found that feeding rats genetically engineered corn caused massive damage to the rats, so they rewrote the study to hide the effects. So you're relying on the FDA. The FDA is relying on Monsanto. Monsanto either doesn't do the studies or they cover up the results. And the person was stunned. But it's also that way with consumers. Well, I'll just accept what the government says is true. Because this is so intimate, our health of our family, etc., it is a call to action like no other. So instead of feeling like a victim, feel like a victor. You can feel sad or angry. You can feel what you want from what we've talked about. But I suggest digesting it in such a way to create empowerment. Like, I'll choose what I consider food and not rely on the biotech industry or their enforcement wing in Washington. I will choose how I want to view the world, protect nature, deal with microbes, share information. You know, the biotech industry has set up trolls to try and attack anyone that speaks against them. It's like, oh, I'll just take them out. I'll just delete that. I'm in charge. And there's something that happens where when we step into what it is we're here to do, we have individual missions and we go there, it's like we step above the glass ceiling, I'm not good enough, what will happen, what will people reject me and all that, to a kind of fearless place above the roof, where all of a sudden we're now part of the solution. And the fate of all living beings or whatnot is intimately tied with our success. So it's as if we're no longer the sole leader of our lives. We're a high-ranking member of the committee because we're taking a leadership role for humanity or for the world or whatever. There's a advanced technique where we polish the rough edges of our personality when we step up to be a leader. And there's so many excuses not to. I don't have a degree in science. I'm not a scientist. I've never taken a science course in college, but I know more about the science of GMOs now than almost anyone, because I've interviewed all these scientists and translated the science into English. That's where I focus. Strategic communication, education, communications, marketing. So I know where I can give and I know where I want to focus it. So that has worked. And I've been incredibly successful without the excuses of degrees and whatnot. So it's the thinking huge. Don't start by thinking how. Think about what's you're longing for, which may be your higher purpose speaking through your desires, and then feel what it would be like if I were fearless. What would I do? And let that energy run through the body and take on with whatever steps you want to try things out. And nature may move you to something that's more perfect for you. But it's different than giving away your power, than hiding under the glass ceiling of what if. It's like, wait a minute, that's not why I'm here. So there you go. That's my best job.
I absolutely love that answer. Incredibly empowering. And I think that's what we need. Sometimes we do feel powerless in this world, when in reality, we have so much power within us to do so much and impact us and find that purpose. So, Jeffrey, thank you so much for that. Where can people learn more about you, IRT?
Responsibletechnology.org. And if you go there, you'll find our Facebook, our Instagram. You'll find plenty of materials there. SecretIngredientsFilm.com is the movie that you can share with your friends to get them on board to healthier eating. And we've got other stuff that once you're on our lists, we'll share things with you in a gentle manner. We don't overwhelm.
Well, thank you so much for this, Jeffrey. And thank you so much for your work and everything you're doing.
Thank you, Casper. Really appreciate it.
And be sure to check out responsibletechnology.org for more information. And until next time, continue writing your own healing story.